Hi everybody. In this chapter we want to talk about the race and ethnicity by a sociological aspects, different sociological aspects we have to analyze and discover with the social facts and social hidden facts about the social side of human being. So one of the greatest and more discussion making topics in sociology, in human sciences, in psychology, in political sciences and other parts of human sciences is the differences in the aspects of race and ethnicity and how we can do something about the equality and how and what we have done about the inequality and other things in race and ethnicity. Again, we have some questions for you to thinking about these topics. What is your race and what is your ethnicity? How is race socially constructed in society? We will discuss about the different aspects of race studies. And one of the greatest aspects of studies about the race and ethnicity, it is about the thinking, how a society, how a community, how the international world think about the races and ethnicities, not about the biological aspects, not about the natural aspects, cultural aspects, about the sociological aspects of how constructed how society can construct a race and ethnicity. And what is the difference between prejudice and discrimination? And what evidence is there that race relations are improving in society? Again, we have chapter outline, race and ethnicity, prejudice, social perspectives on race and ethnic relations, racial and ethnical group in the United States, and global racial and ethnic inequality in the future. We have 8 questions again here, like other chapters, like other sessions. We have a good topic here, sociology and everyday life, the use of sociology in everyday life, a new multicultural awareness. This topic is for 8 questions here. This first question, some deeply held ideas about race and racial differences are often expressed in our beliefs about sports and athletic abilities or ability. How do you think about it? It is true or false? It is true. Most elite sprinters are of West African descent because they possess a great percentage of fast-twitch muscles that can attribute to a specific racial gene. Is there anything that you think about the African American descent, about their abilities in sport or not? True or false? It is false. The chances of becoming a professional athlete are better than the chance of getting struck by writing or writing a New York Times bestseller. How do you think about it? True or false? Again, false. In the 21st century, the number of African Americans in head football coaching positions in the 120 football bowl subdivision has increased significantly. How do you think about it? About the number of African American in head football coaching positions? True or false? True. Congrats. Today, all university presidents and athletic directors at the 125 AFBS colleges are white. True or false? These are false. 6. African Americans account for more than half of all FBS football student athletes. True or false? African Americans account for more than half of all FBS football student athletes. True or false? True. Question number 7, or title number 7, a new multicultural awareness. All of the commissioners of the FBS are white men. True or false? All of the commissioners. It is true. And the last title and the last text is visible racial ethnic diversity on college sports team has little effect on how younger athletes perceive of their future educational sporting opportunities in college and beyond. It is true or false? It is false. Okay, let's go to the hot topics about the race, ethnicity, societies, communities, majorities, minorities, and other social class or social level, perceived social level, not real social level, not real differences, not discrimination. We are talking about the perceived and how a society, how a community think and perceive about the different races. Is it fair or not fair? It is equal or unequal. If there are a lot of inequalities all around the world, especially in the United States, what are the cause and effects about these? Race and ethnicity. Race is a socially constructed reality. That's good, perfect. Race is a socially constructed reality. That's good, perfect. We have collective agreement about the race in society. Because of that, we say that it's a construct reality. Imposition of race and ethnicity and acceptance of a specific construction. These are the factors to construct a race in a society. So because of these three factors, collective agreement, imposition, and acceptance of a specific construction, we can say race is a socially constructed reality. A race is a category of people who have been singled out as inferior or superior, often on the basis of real or alleged physical characteristics such as skin color, hair texture, eye shape, or other subjectively selected attributes. Think about it. We are talking about a real or alleged physical characteristic, not necessarily real. Sometimes it is attributional. Sometimes it is alleged physical characteristic. But in this definition of race, the more dominant word, the most important keyword is physical characteristic. Maybe real sometimes, maybe alleged sometimes, maybe perceived, maybe attributional, not real. But the major part is physical characteristic, such as skin color. One of the major criteria for defining a race is skin color, hair texture, eye shape, or other subjectively selected attributes, not objective. It is subjective. It's your perception. It is the perception of society about that color of hair texture, color of skin, or eye shape, and other physical characteristics. At the end, we should know about the keyword that the core meaning of race is physical characteristic. An ethnic group is a collection of people distinguished by others or by themselves, primarily on the basis of cultural or nationality characteristic. So the key word here is culture and nationality, not about the physical characteristic. So if you want to distinguish between the scientific definitions of race and ethnicity, you should know about the different approaches to the characteristic. If we are talking about the physical characteristic, we are talking about races. If we are talking about the cultural and nationality characteristic, we are talking about the ethnicity. This is the basic part, basic differences. Unique cultural traits, a sense of community, a feeling of ethnocentrism, ascribed membership from birth, and territoriality. These 5 main core key points about the ethnicity you should consider when you are talking, when you are thinking, when you are considering concepts like, for example, ethnicity. There is a very good word here that as the future managers, future leaders of the United States, or maybe all around the world, international leadership, international strategic management, please pay attention to the word ethnocentrism and talk about it and studying about it and know about it and read about it. Ethnocentrism. It is a very, very important concept in the studying of international integrity, in the study of international conversations, and international strategic management. Racial classification before 20th century. In ancient Greece and Rome, we have race was the group to which someone belonged, associated with an ancestral place and culture. So, in that time, when we were talking about the race, we were talking about the same, something like, for example, ethnicity. The race associated with an ancestral place and culture. You see the factor of culture as a defining factor here. But now, in the 21st century, or in the previous century, we have reached to the point that we consider culture for defining an ethnicity, not a race. But about, and in the time of ancient Greece and Rome, we were talking and we were thinking about the ethnicity and race at the same position, no different position. In the Middle Ages until 18th century, family and ancestral ties in the sense of a line or ties to a national group. That's good. Again, nationality and culture, two factors that we are considering now for defining the ethnicity, not for defining the race. So, until the end of the 18th century, there is a confusion about the differences between race and ethnicity. The race was the same ethnicity, with which defining factors, nationality, culture, biology, and physical characteristic and other things. But they were in the same bowl, in the same categorization, no differences. From 18th to 19th century, differences in religion and cultural tradition. Religion added to the factors for defining a race. And 19th to 20th century shared inherited physical and cultural traits. Inherited physical and cultural traits. So, with the beginning at the first years of the 20th century and the end of the 20th century, we had one thing about one added specific factor for defining the race and also ethnicities, ethnical groups or ethnic studies. We had what? Physical, inherited physical characteristic. But in US Census classification, race is defined by perceived skin color, white or non-white, at first. Whereas one category exists for whites, vary considerably in actual skin color and physical appearance, all of the remaining categories are considered non-white. For the basic part, for the base parts of US Census classification, we had two parts, whites and non-whites. Whites were very specific, the skin color and physical appearances, but all the remaining categories are considered to non-white. But in census in the year of 2000, the beginning of the new millennium and new century, racial ethnical self-reporting. In America, it was done a racial ethnical self-reporting that you should say which race are you belonging to. For example, a lot of out-of-American immigrants, and with a huge minority near to become a majority. It's very important for them to announce to the government, to announce to the federal government, America, that how many people are on a specific race. For example, Persian people, Chinese people, Indian people, and sometimes other non-related of European people, not the same, for example, Britain people, origin of United States, Spanish people, not. For example, Scandinavian people. They wanted to know and to announce the government of the government of US, that we are here as a very, very important minority. So in the census, it was done as a racial, ethnical self-reporting. The word multiracial, the word multiracial was first used here, being of more than one race. Someone who can have more than one race, in the category of multiracial. Foreign-born American resident and native-born American residents. Divided American residents to two parts: foreign-born American residents and native-born American residents. Native-born American is clear, race or ethnicity, native-born. We consider only race or ethnicity for native-born American. But for foreign-born American, we have two things. At first, race and ethnicity. Second, nationality, nation of origin. What is your nationality? What is your nationality? For example, I am Iranian, and as a citizen of America, I will have dual citizenship, not dual nationality. Until the end of my life, my nationality will be fixed, static, stable, only Iranian. But after receiving the citizenship of America, I have two citizenships, not two nationalities. Nationalities like your father, your mother. You can go the other parts of the world and live with the other people. They are very kind. They are like your mother. They are like your father, but they are not your biological father and mother and parents. So your parents are stable. No changing in your parents. Different people all around the world can have a good role of parenting to you, okay, but your biological parents cannot change. Because of that, your nationality cannot be changed. Why? Because it is fixed, it's stable, no changing. But you can have other citizenships, okay. So when we want to talk about the multiracial word in the census, American census in the year of 2000, we want to talk about two categories. American residents in two parts: foreign-born American residents and native-born American residents. For both of them, we should talk about the race or ethnicity. But in the part of foreign-born American residents, we also talk about the nationality or nation of birth. And consciousness of kind. It is very good and very important word we are using now in the terminology, in the knowing, in the vocabulary about the racial and ethnical studies. A sense of group membership or consciousness of kind for people within a somewhat arbitrary classification. What classification? What racial classification? You know yourself to belong to yourself. What categorization you use for categorizing yourself? European descent, they are white. People between white and non-white, for example, Northern European, Jewish, Italian, Irish immigrant, and other people, Asian American, Chinese American, Japanese American, Korean Americans, and Filipino Americans. and other parts also. We have a multiracial percentage distribution. 2010, about 20% are white and black or African American, about 19% white and some other race, about 18% white and Asian, about 60% white and American Indian and Alaskan Native, and about 3% black or African American and American Indian and Alaskan Native. But dominant group and subordinate group. We are entering into the classification of groups in the society. In addition to the race and ethnical study, we should know about the different groups in internal race or internal ethnicity, internal and community. It is not out of the community, not out of the race, not out of the ethnicity. It is inter-community, inter-race, inter-ethnicity. We have two types of group, dominant group and subordinate group. As you can see in the different level of power supply and power struggle, whenever you have you supply some different power, different types of power, and there were some fights or some struggle between the powerful people or power holders. We have, very simply speaking, we have two types of group, dominant group and subordinate group. Who is dominant group? What is dominant group? A dominant group is a racial or ethnic group that has the greatest power and resources in the society. Majority, not minority. It is dominant group. For example, in Africa, dominant group should be expected to be black people. Why not? Because this is Africa, the homeland of black people. Why not? They have the greatest, it is expected to have the greatest power and resources in their society. It is expected. Why? Because they are dominant group. A subordinate group is one whose members, because of physical or cultural characteristics, are disadvantaged or subjected to unequal treatment and discrimination by the dominant group. It's not so good. Then in different parts of the world, you can see the people, the race, the ethnicity with the highest number of population are not dominant group. So volume of population, amount of population is not the sign of dominancy or subordinate. It's not the sign. It is not the criteria. It is not a scale. In different countries, we can see different races, different ethnicities, different population with a huge number of members, a very huge population, but we cannot find them as dominant group. So the criteria for diagnosis a group as a dominant group is not the population, amount of population. It is the level of power. The key word for distinguish between dominant group and subordinate group is not the population, amount of population, minority or majority, as in the aspect and the side of population number or amount of population. It is about power holding. So discussion about dominancy and subordinate, it is discussion about having or not having the power. As Shakespeare said, to be or not to be. This is the question. This is the problem. We can say here powerful or not to be powerful, having power or not having power, power holding or not power holding. This is the problem. This is the question about to be dominant group or subordinate group. And prejudice. Prejudice is a major part of talking, major part of discussion about the race and ethnicity in the course of sociology. Prejudice is a negative attitude. At first, please pay attention. Prejudice is not an action. It is an attitude. is not an action. It is an attitude. It's a judgment. It's a mindset. It's a thought style. Prejudice is a negative attitude, not an action based on faulty generalization about members of a specific racial, ethnic, or other group. So, the first keyword about the prejudice is attitude, not an action. Two, faulty generalization, and sometimes faulty overgeneralization, and specific racial, ethnic, or other groups. The term prejudice is from the Latin words proa, it's meant before, and judicium, judgment. It is before judgment, prejudgment, judgment before stunning, judgment before investigation, judgment before knowledge, before assessment. It is your pre-assumption and very basic, powerful, with a lot of bias. A lot of bias. You can see a lot of bias in prejudice. Because why? Because you judge somebody, but you don't have any good and enough information for your judgment. So, which means that people may be biased either for or against members of the other groups even before they have had any contact with them. Any information. There is no data collection here. So no data analysis and no result, only discussion, only biased thinking, and sometimes some attentional bias to some aspects of a specific race or ethnicity. So the keyword here is bias. For or against, it's not important. So when you are talking about the prejudice, you are talking about the attitude and faulty generalization and bias. We have three words: faulty generalization, attitude, and bias. Bias is meant about the pre is bias, which is before. So you have some specific looking at specific attitude, specific thinking, a specific interpretation about something is by your bias. Before studying, before data collecting, before data analyzing, before thinking so deeply, multidimensional studying and multidimensional thinking about something, you have some pre-recorded from your childhood, from your family, from your country, from your race, from your ethnicity, and other things, even sometimes from your religion. One of the greatest symbols of prejudice is religion. Faulty generalization derived from religion. It is not the pure religion. No prophet has talked about the enemies. No prophet has talked about to be a bad man or bad woman. All they have talked about the goodness, about the beauties, about to be kind, to be compassion, and other things. But some perceived thinking, perceived principles, perceived orders from the religions, yes, a great part of prejudice is given, is derived, is received from religious thinking, from nationalistic thinking, and other parts also. Everything that you are talking about power, you can talk about the prejudice and dominancy and subordinate and other things. So, honestly, the prejudice is not positive. But because we have talked about the bias, we can also consider positive prejudice, bias in favor of a group, often our known. Yes, it is. We are right. We are always right. We are always good. We are always okay. It is positive prejudice? Yes. Why? Because the direction of your bias is to the positive aspects of somebody, especially to yourself, to your family, to your country, to your race, to your ethnicity, and other parts. But the major part of prejudice is negative. Major part. We have some negative bias about other peoples because the direction of bias is not to us, to other people, to other countries, to other religion, to other communities, to other races, to other ethnicities. bias against a group that we deem less worthy than our own. Stereotype or cliche, as Europeans said, cliche. Stereotypes are overgeneralization about the appearance, behavior, or other characteristic of members of a particular categories. Overgeneralization. We have different cognitive distortion in human being. That these are mental errors. There are the errors that we can find and see at your process of thinking and say why do you have some errors, some distortions in your cognition, in your thinking process and thinking style. In psychology and psychotherapy, there are between 7 to 10 cognitive distortions. One of the greatest and one of the most dangerous cognitive distortions is overgeneralization. These are stereotypes. And what is the meaning of racism? Racism is a set of attitudes, beliefs, and practices that is used to justify the superior treatment of one racial or ethnic group and the inferior treatment of another racial or ethnic group. So, in the meaning of racism, we have 4 keywords. At first, racism is a type of attitude, beliefs, and practices. 2. Racism is about inferior and superior, up and down, high and low. And third, it is about justification. So, when you talk, when you justify by your beliefs, by your attitudes about inferiority and superiority of the races, of the ethnicities, of the communities, specifically about the races and ethnicities, you can justify your behavior, you can justify your practices, your actions against another race. It is racism. Why? The hottest word, the key word, the core concept of racism is superior and inferior. It is the major part of definition of racism. If we cannot find any superior or inferior, we cannot talk about racism. What are we talking about? So we have a lot of different theories about prejudice. Frustration, aggression, hypothesis. Frustration, aggression, hypothesis states that people who are frustrated in their efforts to achieve a highly desired goal will respond to a pattern of aggression toward others. We have some psychological model here. When you cannot achieve your higher goals, important goals, significant goals, we cannot achieve to them, you will be frustrated. You will be hopeless and sometimes helpless. You feel helplessness. You feel hopelessness. And after that, you feel depressed. You will be in a depressed mood. So sometimes depression or depressed mood disorder. Okay? At the end of the depression, and there is an intertwining part. It is called anger. For anger, we have 2 outcomes. 1, anger is mean that I am not at the right position that I deserve for it. It is not fair for me. When you feel that the behavior of the world, environment, your genetic, your community, your society is not fair with you, and you have lost your righteous right, the right here you deserve for it, you cannot find and you cannot achieve your rights, the outcome is anger. We have two outcomes from anger: assertiveness and aggression. Aggression is not the behavior for giving and receiving your rights. Aggression is a behavior for harming to yourself or to others, especially to others. It is aggression. Sometimes it is active aggression, it is called violence, and sometimes it is not active aggression, it is called passive aggressive behaviors. We have a good word here: scapegoat. The scapegoat is a person or group that is incapable of offering resistance to the hostility or aggression of others. It is called scapegoat. So we have frustration, aggression, hypothesis. If you are frustrated, at the end you will show aggression to other people, to your community, and external of yourself. Why? Because you cannot find and receive your rights, the rights that you deserve. So if you cannot have your good rights, your deservable rights, you will destroy other people or other rights. It is aggression, a behavior directed to harming to self or other people. Scapegoat is that person that cannot receive, that cannot give or receive and show resistance hostility because of the right. And frustration, aggression, hypothesis, one of the major iconic symbols of this theory, it's Ku Klux Klan. According to the frustration aggression hypothesis, members of white supremacy groups such as the Ku Klux Klan often use members of subordinate racial and ethnic group as scapegoats for societal problems over which they have no control. You can see a very good example for showing and for studying about the Ku Klux Klan, about the dominant group, about the subordinate group, about the supremacy and inferior people and superior people, and racism, as we had here, frustration, aggression, hypothesis. Another theory was the authoritarian personality. We have different types of personality, and typology of personality is very important in different aspects of human sciences like sociology, like management, like leadership, like business especially, and also it's originated from psychology, because in psychology we have a very major, very important major so-called personality psychology. You can give your master degree or doctorate degree in personality psychology. It is very wide and very expanded area for studying about everybody that you can see. Everybody that you can see. Psychology of personality has a lot of talking, has a lot of discussion, have a lot of scientific matters and objects and subjects for in the matter of personality. So an authoritarian personality is characterized by excessive conformity, submissiveness to authority, intolerance, insecurity, a high level of superstition, and rigid stereotypic thinking. You can see a lot of people with authoritarian personality around yourself. Sometimes even you may be an authoritarian personality. Okay? An authoritarian personality is characterized by excessive conformity. We don't have any problem with conformity or anything in the mind of a human being, in the mind and action and behaviors and attitude and thinking and beliefs of human beings. We have problems with the severity of the traits, not the traits. We can see the same symptoms that you can find in people with mental disorders, also in people with mental health. The same symptoms, the same signs, the same traits. The issue of being a man or woman with mental disorder or being a mentally healthy person, it is not about the signs and symptoms. It is about the severity. When you have excessive conformity, why you are authoritarian personality? Because everybody has conformity? No. You have excessive conformity, very severe conformity, and submissiveness to authority, intolerance, insecurity, and a high level of superstition and rigid stereotyping thinking. In other words, it is very, very important in the study of races and ethnicities is discrimination. Popular, very popular segregation, discrimination, and prejudice, and also race and also ethnicity. They are the words very near together and not the same meaning, but we have a family of words here. We have a family of vocabulary and terminology about this field of study in human societies. We have, whereas prejudice in its attitude, we talk about it, attitude of inferiority and superiority. Discrimination involves actions or practices of dominant group that have a harmful impact on members of subordinate group. So when you are talking about discrimination, you can observe a discrimination. It is not necessary to study discrimination. You can observe. It is observable and also measurable with people with a discriminative approach to other people. Prejudice is an attitude. Discrimination involves actions or practices of dominant group members or their representatives that have a harmful impact. So, we have actions, dominant, inferior, and harmful impact. The core concept of discrimination is harmful impact. It should be harmful, and it is always harmful. Inferior, superior, dominant, subordinate. What type of relationship? Harmful relationship, harming relationship, harmful impact. Prejudiced attitudes don't always lead to discriminatory behavior. It's very important. Very, very, very important. There is a mediating factor here between prejudice and discrimination or discriminatory behaviors. Prejudice attitudes and discriminatory behavior. There is a mediating factor, which is supporting social support. If you have a lot of prejudice about other people, but you don't have any social support, or you have a little social support for your prejudice, yes, you are alone, or you are at the minority level of prejudice and your specific attitudes about the other races or other ethnicities. But if you live in a country, you live in a nationality, if you have a nationality, you have even sometimes in the different types of tribes, that you have a societal support for your beliefs against other people, or for yourself or your own country, for your own tribe, for your own family, for your own community. Okay. After that, you will be so courageous to show discrimination. No support, no direct, no changing from prejudice to discrimination. Discrimination is an action. If you cannot see any action, you cannot find discrimination. For action, you need teamwork, you need power, you need support. If you have your team players, if you have your social support, or if you have your religious support, every type of support, yes, at that situation, a prejudice can convert to a discrimination. But without this power, no conversion, no change, no going from one stage to another stage. So team working is very important to converting the prejudice to discrimination. And we have Robert Merton, 1949, Typology of Prejudice and Discrimination. Prejudice, attitude, and discriminative behavior. If no prejudice attitude and no discriminative behavior, it is unprejudiced, not discriminative thinking or personality typology. And you don't have any prejudice attitude, but you have discriminative behavior. Unprejudiced discriminator personality. So interesting. No thinking, no believing, no attitude, but you have some actions. If you have prejudice attitude, but you don't have any discriminative behavior, you are at the minor level, at the minority of your society or your community, you are prejudiced non-discriminator personality. But at the worst scenario, at the worst case, you have both of them. Prejudice attitude and discriminatory behavior. You are prejudiced discriminator personality. Genocide. You have learned and heard a lot about the genocide, one of the non-humanistic, one of the out of altruistic approach to human being. Genocide, like suicide, like homicide, like genocide. You will kill a gene, a race, an ethnicity, all of them. You will delete a race from the world. It is genocide. It is the deliberate, systematic killing of an entire people or nation. Deliberate, systematic killing. Very, very formal killing. It's a catastrophe. In 20th century and 21st century, after we have UN, after we find that after World War II, we should be kinder to each other. We should have some organized activity like UN in our world, killing a race, all entire members of a race, is a catastrophe, humanistic catastrophe. More recently, the term ethnic cleansing has been used to define a policy of cleansing geographical areas by forcing persons of other races or religions to flee or die. It is ethnic cleansing. Sorry, but these are the reality of human societies. We are eating each other. So sadly, it is not humanistic. It is not altruistic. Where we are going, not to kill each other. We are going to eat each other. We are talking about the ethnic cleansing. We are cleansing human beings, not the garbage, not the trash, not the additional and additive components to our life. We are cleansing an ethnicity. We are cleansing a race. Think about it. As the future leaders of the US, think about it. As the future businessmen or women of the US, or maybe around the world, internationally decision makers. Each of you may be an international decision maker in the next, for example, 10 years. Think about it systematically in an organization. Also, there are a lot of organizations to protest against these actions, genocide and ethnic cleansing. You are the world hope to be saved, to be secure, to be safe for the next generation of our species. Without that, we will kill each other in genocidal or in ethnical cleansing activities. Discrimination may be individual and institutional. Individual discrimination, very popular, consists of one-on-one acts by members of the dominant group that harm members of the subordinate group or their property. We have keywords here: dominant, subordinate, harming. The keywords of discrimination and action also, action. Because with your mind, with your beliefs, with your attitudes, you are a potential harming man or woman, but you are not real harming man or woman. So it is called prejudice. But when we are talking discrimination, we are talking about actions, about real harming, real killing, yourself, your properties, your relatives, and other people. But institutional discrimination is, wow, much more catastrophic than individual discrimination. The day-to-day practice of organizational institutions that have a harmful effect on members of subordinate groups. Day-to-day and organizational activities. Very organized activities. And fitting four major types of discrimination. It is isolate discrimination, small group discrimination, direct institutional discrimination, and indirect institutional discrimination. I have put some videos from these sociologists, American sociologists, at the Moodle for you to see and to watch and to think and to learn a lot from him. We have two parts. Isolate discrimination is harmful action intentionally taken by a dominant group member against a member of the subordinate group. It is isolate discrimination, harmful action. But a small group discrimination is harmful action intentionally taken by a limited number of dominant group members against members of subordinate groups. Not all the members of dominant group, but a small group of dominant group. Direct institutionalized discrimination is organizationally prescribed or community prescribed action that intentionally has a differential and negative impact on members of subordinate group. It is direct institutionalized discrimination. And indirect institutionalized discrimination refers to practices that have a harmful effect on subordinate group members, even though the organization or community prescribed norms or regulations guiding these actions were intentionally established with no intent to harm. It is indirect. In both parts, direct and indirect, we have some institutionalized discrimination. But in direct, you can see intentionally, direct intentionally, but with no intent to harm. But they are harmful. They are harming. And sociological perspectives on race and ethnic relations at first is symbolic interactionist. Symbolic interactions claim that intergroup contact may either intensify or reduce racial and ethnic stereotyping and prejudice. It is about symbolic interactions, one of the four sociological perspectives on everything that we are talking and studying in this course and especially in this book. Symbolic interactions claim that intergroup contact may either intensify or reduce racial and ethnic stereotyping and prejudice. And functionalist perspectives say assimilation is the process. Talk about assimilation. Assimilation is the process by which members of a subordinate racial and ethnic group become absorbed into dominant culture. We have four types of assimilation. Cultural assimilation, it is acculturation. Structural assimilation, it is integration. Biological assimilation, it is amalgamation. And psychological assimilation. So, in the core, in the basic part, in the crucial field of functionalist perspective to the race and ethnic relations, we are talking about assimilation. Assimilation is the process of observing and to be observed in four aspects: cultural, structural, biological, and psychological. In cultural assimilation occurs when members of an ethnic group adopt dominant group traits, such as language, dress, values, religion, and food preferences. It is cultural assimilation. So, ethnic group or racial group or subordinate group accept the religion of the dominant group, the language, the values, the food preferences, and dress and other things which are related to the cultural dominant group. And in structural assimilation occurs when members of subordinate racial or ethnic group gain acceptance in everyday social interactions with members of the dominant group. Everyday social interactions. So social structures will change to two parts: dominant group and subordinate group. It is a structural assimilation in the structure of society. And biological assimilation, which is very deep, occurs when members of one group marry those of other social or ethnic groups. It is long-term and very, very basic and resistant, change resistant assimilation. After that, you cannot go to the first point. Why? Because this type of assimilation will change your genetic foundation of the race. And finally, psychological assimilation involves a change in racial or ethnic self-identification on the part of an individual. For example, in my minority, a lot of our children will be born in the USA. And yes, basically and genetically, for example, they are African, they are Asian, they are Persian, and their nationality is American, will be American. Why? Because they are born here. So they will accept self-identification, the culture of America, as the major and modern culture. It is called psychological. One part is very important. In biological assimilation, in structural assimilation, and in cultural assimilation, we are talking about the subordinate group. It is not individual, it is group-based assimilation. These are group-based assimilation. But in psychological assimilation, we are talking individual-based assimilation. So, we have ethnic pluralism, is the coexistence of a variety of distinct racial and ethnic groups within one society. Like America, we have ethnic pluralism, different races, different ethnicities within one single society. Equalitarian pluralism or accommodation, etc., in ethnic groups coexist in equality with one another. Switzerland, more than 6 million people with French, German, and Italian cultural heritage. So, equality. You can see equalitarian pluralism. But in inequalitarian pluralism or segregation, other words, you should know at the end of this session the differences between very, very meaningly near words. For example, segregation and discrimination. Very near meaning. But technically and scientifically and sociologically basis, they are different. You see that in equalitarian pluralism or segregation, there's something different with dominant group and subordinate group. They are within one single society. Because of that, we say ethnic pluralism. But they are not, there is no equality together with one another. Inequality. Specific ethnic groups are set apart from dominant group and have an equal access to power and privilege. Power and privilege. So where you are talking about segregation, you are talking about inequality of access to power and privilege, to sources, to money, to social credit and other things. Okay? Segregation is the spatial and social separation of categories of people by race, ethnicity, social class, gender, and or religion. De jure segregation and de facto segregation. This is, I think, Latin or French words. De jure segregation refers to laws that systematically enforce the physical and social separation, for example, of African American in all areas of public life. It is systematically enforced. For example, in America, we have a bad history, we have a shameful history about the dominancy of white people against African dear African American people, dear black people. Why? Because a historical base. Also, honestly, it is not about the modern times and modern life. At the end of 20th century or the beginning decades of 21st century. But just now, we can see a lot of protesting against the inequality between different races, especially for our lovely African American people. So it is systematically enforced. De facto segregation refers to segregation and inequality which is enforced by custom and is more difficult to document than the de jure segregation. This is by custom per case. It is not systematically. Because of that, you cannot find it very simply and documentation easily about the de facto segregation. De jure segregation is very good opportunity for documentation of every type of segregation. For example, in America between whites and non-white or white or black people. But de facto is under the skin of the city. It is customized. You cannot find it so easily. You cannot have some good documentation. So you cannot go to the, for example, court or other legal parts to talk about it. The caste perspective, the class perspective, and internal colonialism. We are talking about the conflict perspective of the sociological perspectives in sociology. Now about race and ethnic relations. The caste perspective, we have talked about the caste in the previous sessions, views racial and ethnic inequality as a permanent features of the US society. It is a caste. The African American experience is different than other racial ethnic groups. This is the approach of caste perspective on racial differences in America. And the class perspective emphasizes the role of the capitalism class in racial exploitation. And internal colonialism occurs when members of a racial or ethnic groups are conquered or colonized and forcibly placed under the economic and political control of the dominant group. These are the different aspects related to the conflict perspective on the subject of race and ethnic relationships in the society of the United States, especially at the end of the 20th century and the first decades of 21st century. We are talking about a split labor market, refers to the division of the economy into two areas of employment, the primary sector and the secondary sector. It is called split labor market. Two different parts, primary sector and secondary sector. And gender racism, also another word, refers to the interactive effect of racism and sexism on the exploitation of women of color, not the same color, different color. It is the combination of gender, racism, and sexism, as you know the meaning of sexism. The theory of racial formation. The theory of racial formation states that actions of the government substantially define racial and ethnic relations in the United States. It focuses on the federal government actions, federal government decisions, on the forming the racial differences or hidden racism, hidden sexism, hidden gender differences, and inequality in the United States. And critical race theory is another theory, suggests that the racism is so ingrained in the United States society that it appears to be natural to many people. Wow! A lot of people think, yeah, that's good. We are not equal. We are unequal. You are from different color, from different race, from different community, from different nationality. It is an opposite of basic parts and basic principles for forming the United States as the most liberal and fair country all around the world. It is an opposite of the basic principles of organizing the government, the federal government, the political principles, the social and altruistic principle for brotherhood and equality in the United States. And the last part is a concept quick review. We have symbolic interactionists, functionalist, conflict, and critical race theory. This is the end of this chapter, and I love this chapter. It can help you to think more sharply about the races, about the ethnicities, about the different nationalities, about the gender, more sharply, not as the people who are out of the university, out of the academy. Very sharp definitions were provided to you to know the differences between near concepts, but honestly and really and basically different concepts. They are near, but they are not the same. We will talk about the different chapters in the future. Nice to talk to you. Thanks for giving your time to me, and see you again in the next chapters. Bye bye.